Welcome to Motivation Library, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into a book that, honestly, has a reputation for being a bit of a brain twister.
Yeah, it's not exactly light reading.
But trust me, it is absolutely packed with ideas that'll make you think, make you question, make you see the world a little differently. We're talking about Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes.
That's right, Leviathan. A real cornerstone in political philosophy, even though it was written way back in the 1650s.
1650s, that's wild. But here's the thing. The ideas in this book about human nature, about power, about how societies work or don't work, they're still so relevant.
Absolutely, like surprisingly relevant. You'd think after almost 400 years it'd be, outdated, but no, it's still sparking debates.
Exactly. And to really get Leviathan, you got to understand where it came from. England in the 1650s was, well, imagine a country ripped apart by civil war.
Yeah, total chaos, traditions falling apart, people questioning everything.
And Hobbes, he's right there in the middle of it. You can see how that would shape his thinking, right?
Oh, absolutely. Hobbes saw firsthand what happens when things fall apart, when there's no order. That experience, it's at the core of Leviathan.
It led him to this idea that you need a strong central power, right? Like that's the only way to stop society from basically imploding.
Exactly. That's his big argument. Without it, we're all just going to,
Tear each other apart.
basically. And that brings us to, I think, one of the most famous, maybe infamous concepts from Leviathan, the state of nature.
Yeah, the state of nature. Okay, so for everyone listening, what is this?
It's like a thought experiment. Hobbes is saying, imagine there's no government, no laws, no rules. What would life be like?
And his answer? Not pretty.
Nope, not at all. Hobbes, he lays it out there. He says life in the state of nature would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Damn, those are some powerful words. But what does he actually mean by that?
He's saying deep down, humans, we're all driven by self-preservation. We want to survive. And we're also driven by this hunger for power.
Okay, so it's like everyone for themselves, constant competition.
Right. And without someone to, enforce the rules, Hobbes says our natural instincts would take over. We'd be at each other's throats constantly.
So basically our natural state is kind of messed up.
According to Hobbes, yeah. He's saying without a strong authority to keep things in check, fear and violence would rule.
It's like, I don't know, a football game with no referee.
Perfect analogy. Even if everyone starts with good intentions, someone's going to get tempted to bend the rules. Then someone else does, and then, boom, it's all downhill.
Chaos. So if this state of nature is so bad, how do we get out of it? According to Hobbes, I mean.
Well, that's where the social contract comes in. This is his solution to the problem.
Okay, lay it on me. What's the social contract?
It's a trade. We give up some of our individual freedom. We agree to live by certain rules, and in return...
In return, we get protection. Someone to keep the peace, enforce the rules.
Exactly. And for Hobbes, that someone is the sovereign power. It could be a king, a queen, a parliament. Doesn't really matter. The point is, they have the power to make sure everyone follows the rules.
But doesn't that sound a little, I don't know, like too much power for one person or group?
It does, right. That's what a lot of people think when they first read Hobbes. But he actually addresses that directly in Leviathan.
So he's aware of that potential problem.
Very much so. He acknowledges that giving one entity that much power could, lead to problems, abuses of power.
Tyranny, basically.
Exactly. But Hobbes' argument is that even a, let's say, less than ideal ruler, even a harsh ruler, is still better than the alternative.
Which is?
The state of nature, the war of all against all. For Hobbes, it's a trade-off. You sacrifice some individual freedom for security and stability.
And that's been the big debate ever since, right? How much freedom are we willing to give up in exchange for safety?
That's the question, isn't it? And there are no easy answers. But that's what makes Leviathan so powerful. It forces us to grapple with these fundamental questions about power, freedom, and what it means to live in a society.
Yeah, it really makes you think, okay, so we've got the state of nature, the social contract, this idea of the sovereign power. But who is this Leviathan? Who does Hobbes have in mind for this all-powerful ruler?
Well, that's where we get into the really interesting stuff. The Leviathan, for Hobbes, it's a symbol, this all-powerful entity that emerges from the social contract.
So it could be a king or a queen, like you said before.
Right. Or a parliament, even a dictator. The key is that the Leviathan has absolute authority. What they say goes, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Okay, but hold on. If the Leviathan has all this power, what's to stop them from just becoming a tyrant? Like going completely off the rails.
That's the question a lot of people have. And surprisingly, Hobbes actually has an answer for that, too.
He does?
Yeah, he talks about these things called the laws of nature. And these are like the fundamental rules that even the Leviathan has to follow.
Laws of nature. You're going to have to explain this one. What are these laws exactly?
Well, think of them like a moral code that exists, well, naturally. It doesn't depend on any government or any written laws. It's about basic principles like seeking peace, keeping promises, things like that.
So even the all-powerful Leviathan isn't above these moral laws.
Nope. And that's where things get really fascinating, because then the question becomes, well, who gets to interpret these laws? Who decides what they mean and how they should be applied? And that's where we're going to pick up in the next part of our deep dive into Leviathan.
Man, I'm already hooked. Can't wait to see where this goes next. Welcome back to our deep dive into Leviathan. We left off with this whole idea of the laws of nature. Like, even the Leviathan, this all-powerful ruler, has to answer to something, right?
Right. Like, there are limits, even to absolute power.
So how does that work exactly?
Yeah.
Who gets to decide what those laws are and how they apply to, real-life situations?
That is the question. And Hobbes had some thoughts on that. See, his big goal, his whole reason for writing Leviathan, was to figure out how to create a society that wasn't constantly on the brink of collapse.
Right, avoiding that whole nasty state of nature.
Exactly. And he realized that even with a sovereign, you still need a way to, make sure the laws are being applied fairly and justly.
So you need some kind of system.
Exactly. And for Hobbes, that system involves judges.
Judges? Like in a courtroom?
Well, yeah. He saw judges as the interpreters of the law. They're the ones who are supposed to make sure the sovereign isn't just, making stuff up as they go along.
So they're like the referees, making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Yeah.
Even the Leviathan.
I like that. Yeah. They're the ones who are supposed to make sure the laws, both the ones made by the sovereign and the laws of nature, are being applied correctly.
Okay, so the Leviathan can't just do whatever they want. There's some accountability there.
Yeah, at least that's the idea. For Hobbes, it's all about balance. You need a strong sovereign to maintain order, but you also need a way to ensure that that power isn't being imposed.
So let me get this straight. If the Leviathan tries to do something that clearly goes against the laws of nature, like, I don't know, command someone to hurt themselves or something.
Right. In that case, a judge could actually step in and say, nope, that's not allowed. That goes against the basic principles of, natural law.
Wow, that's pretty radical for his time. I mean, giving judges that much power to potentially challenge the sovereign.
It was. And it shows that Hobbes, he was a really complex thinker. He was trying to create a system that was both strong and fair, one that recognized the need for both order and justice.
It's making me think about all the debates we have today about, the limits of government power and individual rights. Like, how much power should the government have, and what rights should individuals have?
Exactly. Hobbes was wrestling with those same questions way back in the 1600s, and they're still relevant today.
Yeah, they are. So to sum up, Hobbes is saying that even the Leviathan, this all-powerful ruler, has to answer to a higher authority.
Right, this higher moral code that exists outside of any human-made laws. And it's the judges who are tasked with interpreting those laws and making sure everyone, including the sovereign, is playing by the rules.
This is getting me really curious about the rest of Leviathan.
Yeah.
Like, how do all these ideas about power and justice play out in the rest of the book?
Well, there's a lot more to unpack. Hobbes gets into all sorts of interesting stuff, like his views on liberty. People often assume that because he was all about strong government, he must have been against individual freedom.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's actually more complicated than that. Hobbes believed that there was still room for individual liberty within the framework of the social contract.
Oh, really? So it wasn't just total submission to the sovereign?
Nope. He actually argued that individuals still had a right to do anything that wasn't specifically forbidden by the sovereign or by the laws of nature.
So, like, what kind of things could people do freely?
Well, he talked about things like the right to own property, the right to choose your own profession, even the right to practice your religion in private.
Interesting. So it's not just about blind obedience. There's a balance there.
Exactly. Hobbes understood that people need some degree of freedom to live fulfilling lives. But he also believed that those freedoms needed to be exercised within a framework of laws and order.
So it's like finding that sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Balancing individual freedom with the needs of society as a whole.
That's it. And that's a tension that every society grapples with. It's not always easy, but it's essential for creating a world where everyone can thrive.
Dan, Hobbes was really ahead of his time, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was grappling with ideas that are still relevant today. And, one area where his thinking was particularly, let's say, forward-thinking was in his views on religion.
Yeah, we've touched on that a bit already, like how he saw religious conflict as a major threat to stability.
Right. And he had some pretty strong opinions about what to do about it. In fact, his views on religion were probably some of his most controversial.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued to hear more about that. Let's dive into Hobbes's religious and political ideas in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to Motivation Library. It's time to wrap up our deep dive into Hobbes's Leviathan. And we left off with this big question mark hanging over religion.
Yeah, religion. A bit of a touchy subject, even back in Hobbes's time.
So where does religion fit into all of this? With the state of nature, the social contract, the Leviathan, all that?
Well, it's a big part of the puzzle for Hobbes. He's living through these incredibly violent times. Wars are breaking out all over Europe. And religion is a huge factor.
Right, you had Catholic versus Protestant, all these different factions fighting for power.
Exactly. And Hobbes, he's seeing this chaos firsthand. It's no wonder he's thinking, how do we stop this from happening again?
So he sees religion as like a potential threat to stability, right?
And a huge threat. He's worried that religious differences are going to undermine the whole social contract thing, lead to more conflict, more violence.
Okay, so what's his solution? Does he just want to ban religion altogether?
Well, not exactly. I mean, Hobbes wasn't advocating for, getting rid of religion entirely. He understood that people find meaning and purpose in their faith, but he also knew that religious disagreements could be incredibly divisive.
So he's trying to find a middle ground.
Right. He wants to allow people to practice their religion, but he also wants to make sure it doesn't become a source of, instability for the commonwealth.
And how does he propose to do that?
Control. That's the key word for Hobbes. He basically says the sovereign, the Leviathan, needs to have supreme authority over all religious matters.
Wait, so the ruler gets to decide what people can and can't believe?
Well, not exactly believe. Hobbes makes this distinction between inward belief and outward practice. He says the sovereign can't control what's going on in people's hearts and minds.
So you can think whatever you want, but
you can't, go around preaching against the sovereign's chosen religion or starting your own breakaway church or using your faith to justify rebellion.
Okay, so the Leviathan gets to set the rules, and everyone has to follow them, at least outwardly.
That's the gist of it. Hobbes believed that unifying religion under the control of the sovereign would help prevent those kinds of divisions and conflicts that he saw tearing society apart.
It's definitely let's say, a bold solution. And I can see how it would have been controversial.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're still debating the role of religion in government today. But Hobbes, he was living in a time when those questions were literally matters of life and death.
Yeah, when you think about it that way, it makes sense that he'd want to find a way to, keep the peace, even if it meant giving the sovereign a lot of power.
Exactly. For Hobbes, it all comes back to that core idea, preventing the war of all against all. He believed that a strong, unified commonwealth was the best way to ensure security and stability for everyone. And for him, controlling religion was a key part of achieving that goal.
This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive. I mean, Leviathan is definitely not an easy read, but it's one of those books that really makes you think about the world differently.
It's a classic for a reason. And even though some of Hobbes's ideas might seem extreme or even outdated, they raise these timeless questions about human nature, power, and the role of government. Questions that we're still wrestling with today.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the search for a just and stable society is an ongoing process. And books like Leviathan can help us think more deeply about those big questions.
Absolutely. It challenges us to examine our own assumptions and to consider different perspectives.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But if you're hungry for more intellectual adventures, make sure to subscribe to Motivation Library.
And don't forget to like this video and leave a comment below telling us what you thought of Hobbes' Leviathan. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Until next time, keep those minds engaged and stay curious.